Hello and welcome to the most hated show on the black corner of the internet. I'm your host, the whiteologist, Mr. Blows Your Minds, and this is Black Minds News. Black Minds News is to report, articulate, transmit, communicate, insinuate, develop, investigate, unveil, decode, spread the news, whether by news, video, websites, or quotes from publications. As I articulate this information, I ask that the creator of the universe be here, heart, soul, mind, and spirit, because why? The truth don't need no partner. As a descendant of the greatest people who created this place that we call the United States, we, the foundational black Americans, the black bloodline, the historical lineage, the historical people known as slaves, we who call ourselves BADOS, Black American descendant of slaves. Others say Black African descendant of slaves. Others say ADOS, American descendant of slaves. We, the children today, the offspring, the present generation, we give honor to our ancestors. You know what my motto of the show is? I'm never going to tell you what I heard. I'm only going to tell you what I know. Today's date, August 16, 2019. Found an article. I think it's very appropriate for today and the time we in. We're commemorating. Remembrance is what you see on the screen. Remembrance is freedom. The remembrance of what transpired, what made this place they say is the greatest capitalistic country on the planet. How'd you get there? How'd you do it? What did it take to get you there? Well, today I found across an article that I thought it was well written, explained very well, to the fact that all I'm going to do is read it. I'm going to let you have your conversation after you hear what I present of an article that I found today, being it is on the commemorative 400 years. Some people feel one way, other people going to feel another way, but the point is the conversation needs to be had. So, again, welcome to the most hated show on the black corner of the internet. And stay tuned for this broadcast. Hey, how's y'all doing? Again, this is your host, Mr. Blows Your Minds. First and foremost, I want to say what's good to my subscribers and fam in the house. Welcome to another Black Minds News Report. Again, today's date is August 16, 2019. Passerbys, if you should happen to have come by, somehow found the most hated show in the black corner of the internet. The reason why it's the most hated show in the black corner of the internet is because we used to could get 275,000 views, 50,000, 30,000, and so forth. But today in 2019, we can't get 100, even though I have 2,900 plus subscribers. Been stuck on that for several to 3 years, right? And even with the notifications, said there's about 700 people and still can't get 100. Even with freelancing passerbys like yourself, I can't get 100. So what is it that Black Minds News is doing over here? But we welcome you over here. Stay as long as you want. Go down the aisle's always a grand opening. See something down the aisle you may like. If something should make you feel some kind of way, remember that the motto of the show is The truth don't need no partner. Now let's get into this, because again, it's going to be very self-explanatory. Everyone who hears this, if you stay through the entirety, will have your own way or learn some things or even have a different perspective about what this individual who decided to write about what we're commemorating and how a nation, how it got its wealth. And how people in this nation try to say, no, just them. And there was a small group when all of you were getting it. Now, again, when I say all of you, that don't necessarily mean that everybody who I hear the voice of my sound, which are the people of the time and the lineage and family, just like we, the BADOS and ADOS, are the lineage historical people who are tied to that what you call slaves. Well, what about them people who made all this money in this land? Who you tied to? Everybody couldn't have came through Ellis Island, right? So, this article here came out today in the box. And after I had did my last video, I decided I'm going to go ahead and let it do what it do. And again, I'm not going to intervene no way, shape, forms at all. Because no need for me. Because again, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And all I'm going to do afterward, let it do what I'm supposed to do and let it ride out the way it's supposed to ride out. Now, again, for some of you who are a little heavy-headed and things, when you start to hear another, you're not going to probably be through the duration, but I suggest you stay. It is well written. The subject is something that is very relative, and you might learn a couple things in there. So, no more need to talk by me, but I'm going to go ahead and let you hear. Let me go ahead and read it. Do what it do. The story I'm about to read to you comes out of the box. Came out today, August the 16th, 2019. How slavery became America's first big business. You know I'm going to say that again. How slavery became America's first big business. Historian and author Edward E. Baptist explained how slavery helped the United States go from a colonial economy to the second biggest industrial power in the world. Of the many myths told about American slavery, one of the biggest is that it was an archaic practice that only enriched a small number of men. The argument has often been used to diminish the scale of slavery, reducing it to a crime committed by a few Southern planters, one that did not touch the rest of the United States. Slavery, the argument goes, was an inefficient system, and the labor of the enslaved was considered less productive than that of a free working being paid a wage. The use of enslaved labor has been presented as pre-modern, a practice that had no ties to the capitalism that allowed America to become and remain a leading global economy. But as with so many stories about slavery, this is untrue. Slavery, particularly the cotton slavery that existed from the end of the 18th century to the beginning of the Civil War, was a thoroughly modern business, one that was continuously changing to maximize profits. To grow the cotton that would clothe the world and fuel global industrialization, thousands of young enslaved men and women, the children of stolen ancestors legally treated as property, were transported from Maryland and Virginia hundreds of miles south and forcibly retrained to become America's most efficient laborers. As they were pushed into the expanding territories of Mississippi and Louisiana, sold and bid on at auctions, and resettled onto forced labor camps, they were given a task, a plant and pick thousands of pounds of cotton. The The bodies of the enslaved served as America's largest financial assets, and they were forced to maintain America's most exported commodity. In 60 years, from 1801 to 1862, the amount of cotton picked daily by an enslaved person increased 400%. The profits from cotton propelled the United States into a position as one of the leading economies in the world and made the South its most prosperous region. The ownership of enslaved people increased wealth for Southern planters so much that by the dawn of the Civil War, the Mississippi River Valley had more millionaires per capita than any other region. In recent years, a growing field of scholarship has outlined how America, through the country's geographic growth after the American Revolution and enslavers' desire for increased cotton production, created a complex system aimed at monetizing and maximizing the labor of the enslaved. In the cotton field of the Deep South, this system rested on the continuous threat of violence and a meticulous use of record keeping. The labor of each person was tracked daily, and those who did not meet their assigned picking goals were beaten. The best workers were beaten as well. The whip and other assault coercing them into doing even more work in even less time. As overseers and plantation owners manage a forced labor system aimed at maximizing efficiency, they interacted with a network of bankers and accountants and took out lines of credit and mortgages, all to manage America's empire of cotton. An entire industry, America's first big business, revolved around slavery. The slavery economy of the United South, or United States South, is deeply tied financially to the North, to Britain, to the point that we can say that people who were buying financial products in these other places were, in effect, owning slaves and were extracting money from the labor of enslaved people, says Edward E. Baptist, a historian at Cornell University and the author of The Half Has Never Been Told: Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. Baptist's book came out in 2014, the same year that essays like the Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Case for Reparations, and protests like the Ferguson Uprising would call attention to injustices in wealth and policing that continues to affect black communities. Injustice that Baptists and other academics see as being closely connected to the deprivation of slavery. As Americans observed 400 years since the 1619 arrival of enslaved Africans to the colonies of Virginia, these deprivations are seeing increased attention, and so are the ways of American economic empire, built on the backs of the enslaved, connects to the present. I recently spoke with Baptists about how cotton slavery transformed the American economy, how torture, violence, and family separation were used to maximize profits, and how understanding the economic powers of slavery impact current discussions of reparations. A transcript of our conversation has been edited for length and clarity. P.R. Lockhart. When you talk about the sort of myth-making that has been used to create specific narratives about slavery, one of the things you focus on most is the relationship between slavery and the American economy. What are some of the myths that gets told when it comes to understanding how slavery is tied to American capitalism? Edward E. Baptist. One of the myths is that slavery was not fuel for the growth of the American economy, that it actually is the brakes put on the United States growth. There's a story that claims slavery was less efficient, that wage labor and industrial production wasn't significant for the mass transformation of the United States economy that you see between the time of the independence and the time of the Civil War. And yet that period is when you see the United States go from being a colonial primarily agricultural economy to being the second biggest industrial power in the world, and well on its way to becoming the largest industrial power in the world. Another myth is that slavery in and of itself as an economic system was unchanging. We fetishize machines and machine productions and see it as a quintessential modern. The kinds of improvement in production of efficiency that you see from hooking up a cotton spindle to a set of pulleys, which are in turn pulled by a water wheel or steam engine, that seems as more efficient than the old way of someone sitting there and doing it by hand. But you can also go get changes in efficiency. If you change the pattern of the production and you change the incentive of the labor and the labor process of itself, and we still make these sort of changes today in businesses, the kind of transformation that speeds up work to a point where we say that is modern and dynamic. And we see these types of changes in slavery as well, particularly during the cotton slavery in the 19th century in the United States. The difference, of course, is that this is not the work of wage laborers or professional workers. It is the work of enslaved people. And the incentive is not do this or you get fired or you won't get a raise. The incentive is that if you don't do this, you'll get whipped or worse. The third myth about this is that there was a tight relationship between slavery in the South and what was happening in the North and other parts of the modern Western world in the 19th century. It was a very close relationship. Cotton was the number one export from the United States, which was larger an export-driven economy as it was modernizing and shifting into industrialization. And the slavery economy of the United States South was deeply tied financially to the North, to Britain, to the point that we can say that people who were buying financial products in these other places were in effect owning slaves and were certainly extracting money from the labor of enslaved people. So those are the three myths: that slavery did not cause in any significant way the development and transformation of the United States economy, that slavery was not a modern or dynamic labor system, and that what was happening in the South was a separate thing from the rest of the United States. P.R. Lockhart. As you detail in your work, the focus on cotton production changed what slavery in the United States looked like past or post 1800. But before we talk about those changes, can you discuss what slavery looks like before the true advent of cotton? Edward E. Baptist. This is tied to the aforementioned myths. Both something to remember is that slavery is everywhere in 1776. At the time of the Declaration of Independence, slavery is legal in every one of the newly created 13 states. As for the most part, slavery is associated with the sectors of the economy most closely connected to the Atlantic world. Systems of exchange and markets that link the new United States to Europe, to Africa, to the Caribbean, and to the Latin American. Whether we're talking about the enslaved people working in Virginia tobacco fields, where they produce significant amounts of revenue for the British Crown, or people in the rice fields in the South Carolina and Georgia, or the enslaved people working as dock workers or servants in northern colonies like Boston, slavery is everywhere. But over the next 20 years, as the United States become independent and relationships in the Atlantic formed by revolutions in Haiti, the revolution in France, and the imperial wars associated with those things, several shifts happen. And large due to the resistance of enslaved people and some changes in ideology, you see the beginning of the gradual end of slavery in the North. So slavery on one hand shifts to become a Southern institution, At the same time, there's no longer as strong of a market demand for the products made in the South. The food products made for the Caribbean sugar colonies, where the slaves aren't really given time to make their own basic rations, creates one market for good for the South. But the end of slavery in Santo Domingo, which becomes Haiti, cuts off that demand from one of those main markets. In rice, they are hit to the market as well. And so much tobacco gets made that it overwhelms the market and the price drops. These are threats to the market strength of products made by the enslaved people in the United States South. But right at this same point, British begins its process of industrialization and its focus on cotton textile. And pretty quickly, the price of cotton rises dramatically. Enslavers in the southern United States realize that they can plant particular kinds of cotton inland almost right at the same time that the United States is ensuing its power of what will become Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama. There's a vast new territory that is opening up when enslavers in South Carolina and Georgia are finding out that there is a new product that they can force people to grow and find a new market with. P.R. Lockhart. And now that Southern enslavers have a new crop that they can force people to grow, how does cotton change what slavery looks like in the American South? Edward E. Baptist. The first thing we need to do here is pivot from just talking about cotton as a matter of productive labor and think about reproductive labor as well. And reproductive labor is not just women bearing children, but all the work that goes into raising a child into an adult. This is work largely done by women, but also by family networks and communities in general. In the United States South, by the late 18th century, and in the case of Virginia and Maryland by the 1730s, what we see is that enslaved families and communities were raising children faster than adults died. So this means that the United States, as it becomes independent, no longer relies on the African slave trade, which by the late 18th century is coming under more and more criticism. Enslavers increasingly shift already enslaved people in the South and West into what would become the new cotton territories of the South. It's a vast system for producing cotton that is ultimately fueled by the theft of children from their families and communities who created them. And those who defended the Southern slavery regime would say, look, these are legal processes. People are brought, they're sold. That's the nature of slavery. But alongside the theft of physical labor, this marks a theft of reproductive labor from enslaved people, and it serves as the crucial engine of the expansion of the United States slavery. It is a set of internal slave trades created by enslavers, financed not just by buyers and sellers in the South, but by flows of credits into the region, starting with the land speculations of the late 1790s. And to give a sense of the scale, in 1780s, as the United States become independent, there's something like 800,000 enslaved Africans in the newly formed country. Through the process of internal natural growth in the enslaved population, the reproductive labor, if you will, and the additional importations of roughly 150,000 Africans decades before, the international slave trade ended in 1807. That 800,000 increased to 4 million people. Say that again. That 800,000 increases to 4 million people by 1860. Almost no enslaved African American lived in the Mississippi Territory when it became a U.S. territory in around 1800. But by 1860, the Cotton region have around 2 million enslaved people living in them. The most important development in this shift, the making of this mass cotton producing engine, is the internal slave trade. Estimate varies, but at least 500,000 people were directly moved, and they mostly young adults reaching the peak of their productive labor capacity who are still young enough to be retrained by force. And they are retrained by force in most cases. They seem to have gone through a very disorienting time, and when they are forced to pick cotton and also do all the other operations of a slave labor camp. By picking cotton is especially important because it is the bottleneck of production. They are forced to do this kind of labor and learn this kind of labor, and this is all that's happening under the threat of violence and punishment. If they don't learn how to do it fast enough, P.R. Lockhart. Staying with that last point about the threat of violence punishment, you write about how as the desire to increase cotton profits grows, enslavers focus on how to wring more and more profit from the labor of the enslaved. And that increased productivity, you note, is largely a response to the threat and actual use of torture and violence. Can you talk about the ways that violence gets used as a means of forcing increasingly productive labor? Edward E. Baptist. The first form of violence is the violence of the domestic slave trade itself, where people are chained and forced to march hundreds of miles or are shipped around the Cape of Florida. But after that, the violence is really in two forms. One is really a sort of a policing violence, something we sadly all too familiar with today, that focuses on constraining African American movement. You know, making sure that people don't leave the labor camps to which they have been sold. And with that, you see patrols and readiness from whites to question any African American they don't recognize. And once enslaved people are pretty much fixed in one place and are forced to go out into the cotton fields daily for work, what you see is during the day itself, there is an increased level of supervisions by whites. In the South Carolina island and in different ways in the Chesapeake, enslaved Africans and African Americans often worked outside immediate white supervision and often outside direct measurements of their labor output. So while in South Carolina there's a daily task, in contrast to that, the people enslaved on the cotton fields of Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana are forced to work all day. The work is measured and their labor output is increased over time. So we see that people are forced to work from dawn to dusk, often with direct white supervision, and those who stop working are yelled at to continue work. And at the end of the day, that output is weighed and recorded. There's a sort of quintessentially modern ideal that if we enumerate how much people work, we can evaluate that labor better, and then we can demand more labor from them. And that's what's happening during the cotton slavery. Quotas for daily cotton picking and minimums that you have to make or else you'll be whipped clearly increased over time. There's a debate about whether or not if they increase because cotton seeds are better or if because more labor is demanded and people are whipped for not producing enough, or see their quotas increase because they did not produce enough. There's a debate about what it is the causal factors in this increase, and I am okay with saying it's both, but you have a quantitatively different kind of labor which produce a quantifiable results. An increase of 400% in the average amount of cotton picked per day from 1800 to 1860. P.R. Lockhart. I want to shift this conversation a bit and move away from what's in your book to the book itself. How is it was received after it came out, and what it says about how America actually views and understands these kinds of histories? One of the things you often highlight is the importance of centering the voices of enslaved men and women in the stories of American slavery. And you've been criticized for doing that. At a time where the country is having more and more discussions about slavery and its impact on the present, Why do you see centering the voices and lived experiences of the enslaved men and women as an important aspect of discussing this history? Edward E. Baptist. I'll focus on two reasons. Those voices are truly the wellspring of a tradition of interpretation. There always been the other half, the true half of this history. When we talk about half that has never been told, mentioned in the title of the Baptist book, there are a set of crucial voices that in the United States go from survivor of slavery to people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Cedric Robinson, and moving to the present in the works of economists like Sandy Darity, Derek Hamilton. But there are a set of voices who are refusing to accept a story that says that what the survivors of slavery endured in the cotton fields has nothing to do with the wealth of USA today, or the disproportion of wealth between white people in the United States on average and the wealth of black people in the United States on average. So, on one hand, this is a tradition of people who make a very obvious point which seems clearly true to me. But on the other hand, this is a tradition that has been all too often ignored or downplayed or critiqued. It's crucial to center the voices of the people talking about their own situations, not only because they understood it best and understood the facts of it, they also understood the philosophy of it. Frederick Douglass gets told after he escapes from slavery that he needs to be charismatic, not intellectual. A white abolitionist tells him, "Give us the facts, we'll take care of the philosophy." And he tells them no. But I think centering those kinds of voices is crucial. And the interpretation that comes from those voices as a historian, that is the job. It is also an important thing when we get to my second point, that a huge component of white American identity is a quest for historical innocence and historical exceptionalism. And this depends on having white voices telling the story. As a white historian, the best thing I can do to disturb that is to bring non-white voices to the forefront and how I tell the story. Not just because these voices are correct, but because telling the story in this way helps to a small extent to do the work of helping a white reader to be able to confront the history of their own identity, formation. This history of their own wealth, I won't say that one book or one historian is going to take care of it, but that's the work that I can try to do. P.R. Lockhart. You're now 5 years removed from the publication of The Half Has Never Been Told. Going off on your point about doing the work to push their voices to the forefront, in 2019, a year where we're commemorating 400 years since the arrival of the roughly 20 enslaved men and women to what would become the United States, though not all scholars agree on this exact anniversary, do you think the country is more receptive to hearing these voices? Edward E. Baptist. That's a tough question in 2019. I wrote the book over a long period of time, and when I started, people were writing different things and in some cases asking different questions about slavery. But there were a number of folks who had started to ask questions that mine were inspired by and were pushing the conversation towards the works of Du Bois, Angela Davis, and the Caribbean tradition of study. I don't know where the conversation is going to go next. But what I am happy to see is that because of the work of the activists involved in the movement for Black Lives and the activists in the different reparation movements, some of the questions and critiques that a few of U.S. histories try to amplify are being amplified far more broadly and effective by these forces in society. The question of reparations, for instance, come up every 15 years or so as something that the media engages with, and there are predictability as a backlash as you see a massive white resistance to the ideal. And that backlash plays a role in burying these types of questions. So, I hope that whatever the policy outcome might be, I hope that the conversation don't get buried by that resistance. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we're talking about reparations in a moment where white nationalism is ascendant. And in the past, those kind of phenomena have had the effect of not only producing violence, but they also suppress discussions about how we address a question of what is owed after slavery. Ending. And the debt is so great that whites have little claim to say that something is too much to pay. They have had no standing to argue that the wealth distribution should remain where it is today. There's no justifiable way, in my opinion, to make that argument. So, I am worried that the violence of our time may suppress any movement towards a better resolution of the argument implied by the calls for reparations. Now, I said I wasn't going to say nothing, but I couldn't resist it, right? Let me do a little bit, then we're going to get about it. I know you done did about 29, 30 minutes of reading, but you got to get this part from me because I want to hear what y'all got to say. So it says that how slavery became America's first big business, right? And, you know, we had people in this land who tried to downplay the fact of what slavery and the contributions of what our ancestors have given. They try to say that really it was kind of like a myth, right? Well, there was slavery, but again, it was just this small segment of society. It wasn't really like it was all of us, or those who actually will say they admit they were here. Everybody else try to say that I came from Ellis Island and I'm an immigrant, and right. But this thing, like, you could rarely ever find anybody who actually say they are tied to it. Rarely you find them, right? And so they said that the myth is talking about this was an archaic practice, right? It's out of date. That's what it was. There was definitely something at the time. There was only a small percentage of people who benefited from it. And so it was really ineffective system. It was a really ineffective system. Basically, if you make some comparison, if you really just say that, well, what about those that were working, like the working labor that were getting paid? It was basically just really equivalent. I mean, I can't really say that all the wealth of the country is made basically on them. See, downplaying the fact of what the contributions of BADOS, ADOS have contributed to this land, of the opulence and wealth that many people here, and those who also get to migrate, the change of venue because of what's not going right or whatever things your family might have been tied to that allow you to get that free shipment over here, right? you all act as if you don't understand it. So that's why Black Minds News have to find articles like this at sometimes and do what? I have to disseminate it for you, right? Because I know many of you won't go in there and read it. Not saying my folks or those who subscribe. So I'm talking about other folks who might just be hearing me, right? That might be a little ticked off a little bit, right? And so, you know, they want to downplay and make it admit that the greater wealth of this nation really didn't come from the contribution of what was enslaved. Yet, it talks about the period between 1860 to the Revolution, right? They also try to make that sound like, well, you know, that was just kind of like a little modern business of the time, right? You know, like any old little mom and pop store, anybody, you know, just trying to do a little startup, right? Right? And it was just a modern business that it just kept evolving and changing, trying to, you know, like maximize its profit. It wasn't really that lucrative. It was really inefficient. It didn't really work well. And, you know, it's really primarily just under the South, right? But you see, as the article talks about, that's a myth. And it's always been a myth. Matter of fact, they were one in again, the export. Did you also hear to the fact that if you ain't already heard on this show, that our ancestors produced the world's cotton for making their clothes? Huh? Without our ancestors doing what they did, where would the industrial revolution or industrialization of what they created in, I guess you say textile and manufacturing textile, right? That's what would they have come? Matter of fact, we are the catalysts. Our ancestors had to be the catalysts for, again, because we produced the clothes for the world, not just here. We were the catalyst to making what the Industrial Revolution, the industrialization happened. We are that. We are the descendants of that. And so here they was. It would take young. Now, our ancestors, when they first came here, it went old, as some of us are becoming. They came here young and spry and, you know, vigor. And they took them, broke them, called themselves retraining, and had a forcible way of how they went about doing it, didn't they? Huh? The violence and the torture to get high productivity, as they would say. Get the maximum I can get out of you. See, they said trying to make the compares to, like, when you punch a clock, right? You have your time and so forth, but they can't come in and crack the whip, even though you have sometimes some asshole type of supervisors and bosses, right? And coming in when they getting their ass chewed out, then they come down and chew your ass, right? But again, it don't become where they can take you back in the back and they got, you know, Bluto and them back there whooping your ass, right? You can't do that, right? And when it came to our ancestors, though, right? That was just part of the normal day norm. Now, again, you could be one of the high producers, and yet you still could get it. And so when you looked at it, you know how they were talking about, you know, there was the expansion of because of what happened with Haiti, right? Because remember, they end up getting the Missouri Compromise, right? When they buy this territory, the Louisiana Purchase, right? And so now they were all trying to expand. And the expansion, certain people who were in certain position, they end up being brought, sold, and auctioned and start to be migrated and tracking thousands of miles to get to these new territories. So I was just thinking about, when you think about auction block, for a lot of people who probably can't understand that, you know, a lot of you sit there, and I think there's only two sports that I really know that I see that. Now, I don't watch all sports, and I haven't watched a lot of sports recently, but the fact is they have a combine and a draft, right? Well, that's kind of like how our ancestors went through things, right? Somebody, again, you know, like when you're watching the combine, they out there tracking to see, you know, how strong they is, how fast they is, how high they can jump, right? How the agility, right? They do all these tests and they clocking you compared to other ones that's prior to them will test you based on what this one and the stats and the analysis. And when you look at that combine, it's white folks sitting up in the stands with their notes and their pads and right. And it's all Negroes out there running the 40-yard dash, pumping weights, all this in order to be who? See, these stats, because again, this business has been around a long time. Same thing when you watch the NBA, it's the same thing. So that drafted and being on the auction block are kind of similar. You understand? And so basically that's why somebody ended up creating the book, The $40 Million Slave, right? You're still a slave, even though you, again, live in a bigger house, eating better type of biscuits. But and primarily you are equivalent to the same as what our ancestors who, again, was no arbitration, wasn't no union. You understand? And for people to act as if like they're not on board about what done took place as it's the commemorating of the 400 years of remembrance is freedom. You allow few people to try to make stances when most of the rest of you should be doing the same thing too. And so, they said from the 60 years between 1801 and 1862, just in that period alone before the Civil War, they were talking about the increasement of 400% during this. Well, I ain't gonna say. Did I say 18? Oh, I'm gonna say 1801 to 1862. And they said this is where the increasement of 400% of the profits was due. Again, they was pushing it, right? That's why we know the violence and the things that were happening, because look at the productivity and the percentage of money that was made. So that means that those overseers and shit was out there just, putting the fear in them. And so they say that this is what propelled the U.S. into world leading, not just the world leading, the global world that we know in was the economy. By the time the Civil War comes around, they said the South in itself, more millionaires per capita than any other place that you call these United States of that time. I'm going to say that again. From 1801 to 1862, the increase of profits went up to 400%. We know what it is, that 60-year period. They was in there cracking heads, raping and everything. And so to keep yourself out of that condition, you did what? He said you had to have 100 pounds a day. In the beginning, it was a struggle, right? You weren't used to doing that. Now, depending on what kind of individual, the makeup you are. Now, if you're a little stronger than others, that might be something, you can manage. If you're a little smaller person and it takes more to get 100 pounds out of you, I'm pretty sure there had to be some collaboration. Some people were helping. Those who could do a little bit more sometimes was helping. Because if not, they was able to watch you be terrorized and brutalized. And there was no way to stop none of this. And so because of that terror, it increased profits. And in that increase in profits, it propelled this nation to becoming the world's leading economy. And you can see by the time the Civil War is coming, all the millionaires are in the South per capita. When you think about, because again, I guess that would be kind of easy because you're not really counting slaves. And so, I remember reading in the log cabin. I think it was about log cabin, right? Talking about we was 20% of the population in the South. right? We were the mass population of people in the South at that time. To say 13%, we lost a lot of people, and we know where a lot of that happened during Reconstruction and Jim Crow, right? A lot of stuff happened, right? And so when they say per capita, I guess the white percentage of South versus that of slaves versus, again, saying North. And North are those who have been watching this show. No, I done told you that the North, again, you got to ask yourself, whose business is what? So British is the North. The Britain was the North. Right? That's what they say. That's what he's saying. The Britain was the North, right? But who stole that and made their own country from them is the question, right? So who were these ones that were getting these charters and all this other stuff? That's some research you're going to have to do. And to get on top this all off is the fact that, they always try to make it seem like they didn't have or don't know. Now, again, we may not know directly what our ancestors' name is, but they're saying there's all the meticulous, again, think about that. They had to have meticulous records because that's the only way you got paid, right? You had to have meticulous record keeping. How else would you get paid? Now, if you, again, and I won't touch it because, again, I'm going to do that eventually. But that's just what it was, y'all. And that's what it continued to do. Here we is, the ascendancy of what right here has talked about. When you look at yourself, know you come from greatness. Look what the people had to do to get what they got. But they couldn't have got it without what us and our ancestors and what they put in. So we are the byproduct of that. And always understand that, because again, people try to make us seem like we insignificant. Who would they be? Where would you be without us? Right? And so there's a lot more on this I could have went on, but I want to leave a lot for those who might hear and go through the entirety of the video, things you might have heard and seen that may trigger something you and make you want to talk about. So I'm going to leave that open for you. And again, go ahead and get up out of here. And let's see if I got it right. I don't even think I got it right. I ain't got it right, do I? No, I ain't got it right. So let me do it the right way, y'all, right? And then we can get up out of here, right? So, let's go and do it. So, I want to thank everybody who, through their participation, sat through the entirety of it. I want to thank each and every one of you from Black MINDZ News Report. So, we got to look at it this way, man. This is the 400 years. I seen something where Sheila Jackson is saying some things that just don't make no sense. They want to talk about that HR 40, just studying, but ain't nobody talking about cutting no check. Plenty money been made. Plenty business has been created. Plenty generational wealth has been garnered. But the descendants of it seems, do for yourself like we did for our own. Either you deny what is self-evident that is true right before you, or, the Creator will have His way. He will have in due time. You can't hide from the inevitable. You can lie with a straight face and say how one doesn't hate, one doesn't, I'm for. You can do all that in the presence of man. But as time goes on, we all have to meet the inevitable. Until then, I want to thank everyone and each one again once again for your participation. Remember, when you see one another, greet your brother. What's good, brother? See your sister. Hey, sister, what's good, girl? You looking good too, right? And, we see either one. Get that universal nod if you can't say what's good. Just say, look, that little nod we do, right? Keep it pushing, right? And remember that to take all that hate, jealousy, envy, and spite out your ass. Because you better understand we all in this. And we got to understand that what uniform that we wear and the team that we own. Now we're going to have some traders on the team. And again, there's always some benefits in having an ally. But ask your allies a couple questions. Ask your allies, if this shit get hot, are you still gonna be down with me? Have you ever heard of John Brown? And if you have, is he real? Or is that a fictitious story that somebody made up? If they believe in it. Right? So remember also that there's many people out here. Just as much you can have allies, you got some people out here who are looking to our demise. So it is incumbent that we all stay vigilant, mindful, cautious, and in high spirit. Because the truth won't need no partner. This is Mr. Blows Your Minds. Peace, love. Until the next show, y'all. The next show.